Hi, I'm Tyler Ferrell with Golf Smart Academy, and in this video, I'm going to talk to you about training at home during the off-season. I think one of the biggest challenges for the do-it-yourself golfer is choosing what to work on. And when you're not playing a lot, that gives you an opportunity because you're not really worried about the immediate results. You can make some long-term improvements, but also you don't have quite as much feedback. You don't have as much data as far as what you're struggling with. So in this video, I'm going to talk you through how to decide what to work on, as well as some strategies and some tips you can use for actually training your swing at home. So the first big tip is when you're training at home, you want to have feedback, whether that's video, I've got a mirror right here that I could look at, or we're going to train some wrist stuff using something like the HackMotion. There's lots of good training aids and things that can help you become more aware, but you don't want to just rely on feel. If you're just relying on feel, you're going to tend to find your progress is a little bit more sporadic instead of consistent, and you're going to tend to find that it feels a lot more different day to day. In general, when you're working on your swing, there are three big goals. For any specific shot, there are three big goals. Hit the ball solid, hit the ball straight-ish, hit the ball far. When it comes to making solid contact, the two big factors are going to be where is your body in space compared to the golf ball, especially where is your upper body in space compared to the golf ball, and then the straightness of your arms or the control of the radius. Those are the two big buckets to look at. So if you're struggling with solid contact, you want to look at the swing from the face-on camera angle, or you want to look at, or from the face-on camera angle, you want to look at your body orientation compared to the golf ball, both in terms of the height, the location forward, backward, potentially from the down the line, the location in towards the golf ball, away from the golf ball, and the angle of your body. For the arm straightness, there's three big areas you want to look at. You want to look at the shoulders. So have I kind of pulled my shoulders or reached my shoulders? I want to look at the straightness of my elbows, and I want to look at the position of my wrists. Two big positions for the wrists are going to be flexion and ulnar deviation. So the elements of the wrist that are going to control straightening the arms are going to be getting into more of a neutral wrist position, as well as ulnar deviation. And typically the bending of the arms will come from a radial deviation and more of an extension of the wrist in accompaniment with a bending of the elbow and a pulling of the shoulders. So those are the big things to look for in when prioritizing solid contact. I'll talk about a couple drills you can do at the second part of this video. Second piece would be looking at straightness, right? Or whatever curve you want. So I use the term straightness loosely because if you want to hit a draw, then it's not going to be totally straight. But from straightness, you're primarily going to look from down the line, looking at the club face position and the path of the club. I think a really good benchmark or checkpoint is looking at the club halfway down. If the club is overly open or overly shut, or if the path is overly out or overly in, then that usually reveals that it's more of a transition, or if the club face is way out of position, it could be a grip issue that you have to work through. If everything is kind of good at this point or close enough, but then you struggle with either a big miss off to the right or to the left, then it's usually more of a release issue. So I'd use that down the line, halfway down kind of checkpoint to prioritize what phase of the swing do I really need to work on. Now, if I'm working on hitting the ball far, there's two big things. I would primarily look from the face-on camera angle, and I would look at the location at the top of the swing, making sure that I'm making a complete pivot, both in my hips and my spine and my arms. And then the second piece would be looking at more my transition and my downswing loading. If you get real advanced, you can also look at how well you're transferring energy during the release. But I find that those first two are the low-hanging fruit for a lot of amateur golfers. So prioritize what you want to work on. Ideally, we're going to improve everything, but it's helpful to have one metric to kind of monitor to see if I'm making the progress that I want. Am I trying to hit the ball more solid? That's the first goal. Am I trying to hit the ball straighter, control the direction? That's the second goal. And then am I trying to hit the ball far? That would be the third goal. Now, as a general principle, during the season, I like to make smaller tweaks. I like to make tweaks more to setup, ball position, posture, things that can get off when you're just not really focused on them. During the off season, I like to look at some of the bigger picture things that'll elevate my technique ceiling. So oftentimes these are trickier elements like how the arms and the hands are working during the release. Those can be awkward to think about the first week or so that you're working on it, but after you've done it for a month or so, it will become more second nature. Off season is a great time to work on release training, and that's what we're going to talk about with the HackMotion. Secondly, can be body pivot position. So if you have kind of a really awkward body movement, either a big sway off the ball, a big early extension, a big slide, a big forward lunge, or kind of diving into the golf ball, those can cause big inconsistencies and relatively poor contact and face control. So the two first elements that we're trying to train. And in the winter, that's a great time to work on those. I highly recommend using a mirror and doing kind of slow motion training first, but focusing on improving your overall body positions, especially during the release phase, has a huge impact on your consistency of contact and your overall repeatability of your golf swing. All right, now I'm going to provide a couple cautions for each of these. When you're working on solid contact, when you're doing indoor practice, one of the elements that's hardest to monitor is the depth. When you're hitting off the fairway or when you're hitting off natural ground, you want to improve the location of the low point, getting the low point far enough forward, but you also have to work on the depth so that it's not getting too deep. A lot of people who hit fat shots think that they just need to get their weight more forward, but it's really they need to control the height and the vertical elements or the width elements in order to control the depth. That one's just a little bit harder to monitor and control on turf. So if you can, try to get a few reps outside, even if it's just swinging in the backyard, to kind of see how deep the club is going. The other thing that you can do is if you spray the club face, if you're hitting very high up on the club, that usually indicates that the club is too deep. So if you use a Dr. Scholl's foot spray or something like that, you can monitor the depth that way. But that's one thing that you really want to watch out for when you're working on solid contact. Now, when you're working on hitting the ball straighter, which I think is a great element to work on indoors, you want to be careful that you monitor your setup and your start line. So even if you have a launch monitor, I would recommend occasionally putting down an alignment stick so that I can make sure that I'm not cheating and getting my body alignments too far off. And I would either put a rope on the ground indicating a start line kind of like this, or if you have a good at-home station, you can also just easily attach or hang a rope from a specific position. That way, when you hit a shot, you can monitor where is the ball hitting compared to the rope. You'll see that one started just outside, so if I had the club face a little bit closed, then that would have been a nice push draw. But frequently what I'll see is when golfers are training their swings indoor, they lose sight of where the ball is starting, and then it becomes a bigger problem when you go from hitting indoors to hitting outdoors. So monitor your body positions and monitor your start line while you're working on your elements associated with ball flight and hitting it more straight. Now lastly, when it comes to trying to add speed or working on hitting the ball further, and I do caveat, hitting the ball or speed could be working on hitting the ball a more consistent distance, doesn't have to be hitting it more distance, but for most people more distance is the bigger goal. When you're working on speed, you really have to monitor your sequencing. I've got an online website and I work with tons of golfers in person. I would say that some people benefit greatly from working on their speed training, but I often see golfers who mess themselves up or get into a funk from how they're working on speed training. If your main power source comes from the upper body, either pulling down or spinning, then if you do that while you're doing speed training, you're going to increase the gradient and your sequencing is going to get even more off. Secondly, if during your release, your application of speed is more from kind of bending the arms and flipping the wrists or having a really poor release, that's going to get worse from speed training. So I think that if you want to do speed training, you want to get your swing in a good place where when you're reinforcing it by trying to swing harder, it doesn't mess up the sequencing, because what will usually happen is when you're doing speed training, you will either lose solid contact or you'll lose your direction. And so that's why I usually want to train those first, so that you have an idea of how to get solid contact back or how to improve your direction while you're working on speed training. I have the controversial opinion that I think when you're doing speed training, you should also be monitoring technique and form. You shouldn't just be working on speed. When you do just working on speed, that's when I see it has the bigger impact as far as losing your quality contact and face control when you return to hitting your normal shots. Okay, when you're doing your at-home training, I mentioned working on the release. With the HackMotion, I think that you want to follow kind of a progression of 9-3, 10-2 full swing, where you're just trying to do the same kind of force elements. You're trying to hit the ball the same way while varying the length of backswing, potentially varying the intensity of your body rotation. But you should not lose the quality of contact just from making a bigger swing. If you do lose your contact from making the bigger swing, that usually means that your body is getting more out of position on the fuller swing compared to the shorter swing. I highly recommend doing some of the slow motion drills, like the motorcycle drill, where we're bringing it back and we're focusing on the wrist position, controlling the club face. One caveat is make sure that when you're doing those, you are also improving your body rotation or your sequencing. So you are working on your pivot as you're working on those control elements. That will ultimately make it feel more like your whole swing is unified rather than disjointed, like you're just working on your hands. If you're just working on your hands, oftentimes what happens is your body starts to kind of shut down, and then you can lose some of your consistency because you lost some of your sequencing. Okay, so one of the great things that you can do with the HackMotion is the motorcycle drill. We're going to go up to the top, and we're basically going to look at it and continue keeping it in range, kind of like this. Trying to maintain the wrist position all the way down. I do find that the motorcycle drill, let's reset address. So I do find that when I do my natural motorcycle, I get out of range about halfway down, and then I get back closer to range around impact. So that could be something if you feel like you're overdoing it. I don't think that's that big of a problem, but you can see the graphic on the screen, and you can easily see what the motorcycle drill is designed to overcome is if you have a tendency to either get really cupped at the top. So here's my address. So if you have a tendency to get really cupped at the top, it won't work. So it's going to help me feel like the wrist is a little bit more flexed. While the wrist is flexed, I also want to feel a little bit more tension, kind of stability here in my arm. Now, what the motorcycle drill is designed to do is if I pull the club down like this, you'll see that it gets into an overly open position, where there I've squared the face, and now I'm actually going to shallow it a little bit better and come into a good position just like that. So the motorcycle drill can be really helpful for tweaking or correcting your transition, top of the swing, wrist position. That's something that's a little awkward to do when you're playing a lot, so I think that's a good one to work on during the off season. So there's lots of different videos on specifics of what to work on, but I wanted to do a video to kind of give you some broader context of what to work on during the off season. Make some big lasting changes by improving the overall body position. So relatively stacked body turned. I have a drill called the merry-go-round drill that helps you feel where you want your body to be at impact, and then training your arms to be into a good impact position. When in doubt, work from impact backwards, since that's ultimately the club hitting the golf ball. That's all that really matters. That's what's going to make the golf ball fly. But the off season is a good time to work on some of the elements that make you a little less consistent or a little less powerful at that moment of truth. So from Golf Smart Academy and HackMotion, good luck training your golf swing in this off season.